Are you all able to hear me? Okay. So, are you all have you all come here for this TCS training program, summer training? How many of you? It looks like a bigger number than what I anticipated. So, how many of you have come for TCS training, or how many of you from? Okay. So, where are you all from? No, you have come here for TCS training program or for what purpose? Training. Summer internship of the TCS group. Okay, remaining or where are you from? Okay, sure. Okay, I just wanted to confirm. Okay, so we are going to talk about randomized algorithms. Okay, please tell me if you are not able to hear me, or if my writing is not visible to you. Okay, so I suppose you all know what an algorithm is, so you have some exposure to computer programming, and you have done some programming and you know what an algorithm is. Okay, so typically when we say an algorithm, we normally mean what we call a deterministic algorithm. Okay, so what is a deterministic? So what is an algorithm? It's a well-defined, precise sequence of precise statements telling the computer what to do and how to do. Okay, so we know computer only receives instructions in the form of machine language or assembly language, and it converts it, it understands it and executes that instruction. So, but what we are, when you talk about algorithms, we don't go at that level, we stay at a higher level. Okay, so it is machine language or assembly language is at a very lower level, which is meant only for instructing the processor CPU what to do, how to do. At a higher level is an interface between humans and computers. So that is what we call the higher level, or what constitute these programming languages, Pascal, C and these things. And algorithm is at a still higher level. So an algorithm is basically to tell the programmer how to write his program. Okay, it's at a more higher level. So here we won't write all details of several of the things. We know, we leave it to the understanding of the programmer, that he will be able to understand these and implement these. Okay, and when you talk about deterministic algorithm, so what do you mean by determinism? So determinism is what we call as predetermined. Okay, everything evolves or proceeds according to some well-defined plan. Okay, and so in the case of computers, the computers that we normally use and the algorithms that they employ, they are all deterministic algorithms. Okay, so when you say you are writing a program to multiply two matrices, okay, two matrices of say A and B of dimension say m by n and B say n by p. Okay, then we know how is this defined. So suppose C is the product of these two matrices A and B, then C will be a matrix of dimension m by p. Okay, so it has m rows and p columns. And how do you define the ijth entry of this matrix C? The ijth entry is determined by taking the ith row of the matrix A and jth column of matrix B. Okay, take the ith row of matrix A, maybe row I of A and column J of B. Okay, and row I would be a vector of n entries. Okay, there will be n entries, and column J of matrix B would be again a n vector of n entries, and then you take their inner product. So, in the inner product what we mean is you just multiply first entry of this and first entry of this vector, second entry of this and second entry and so forth, and sum up all these n products, and this is what we get. The Cij is mathematically precisely defined to be the product of ijth entry of A with ikth entry of A with kjth entry of B and take the summation. Okay. So, this is what we define by the product. Now, suppose you want to thing, you put this in a loop for I equals 1 to n 1 to m, and then for j equals 1 to n 1 to p. Okay. Then you introduce another variable, this k, for k equals 1 to n. You have this Cij. Okay. You initialize here that Cij is 0, and then Cij is Cij plus Ak and Bkj. And then when you do this addition for n times, this for loop ends, and then you do this n times for different values of j from 1 to p, this for loop ends, and then do the same thing here. In this way you have a very clear set of instructions, okay, as to how to proceed, and these instructions clearly tell the computer what is to be done. The next step in the algorithm, okay, is very well defined. That is what we call a deterministic algorithm. There is no ambiguity, there is no, even if it has to make choices, these choices are all well defined. Okay. So, there is nearly no choice. So, okay, in effect. So, these are well defined, and this is what we call a deterministic algorithm. So, if you take a deterministic algorithm for solving a problem, okay, then whatever computational problem that may be, then you apply the algorithm and to this you apply this algorithm to this input and look at its execution. Okay. So, what do you have and look at any intermediate step in the execution of the algorithm over this input. Everything is well defined, predetermined. Okay. How the algorithm proceeds and what is the next value it computes and how does it compute and so forth. Everything is well defined and everything goes according to a prefixed plan. That is what we call a deterministic algorithm. Okay. So, in this case we see that the entries of the matrix Cij are computed in a predetermined fashion. So, first you compute the first row of C, okay, and then in the first row of C what do? You first compute first Ci1, C11, okay. First you compute C11, that is the way I have written down these for loops for I equals 1 to m, okay, which means C1, and then for j equals 1 to p, which is C11. The first entry of the matrix that would be computed is C11, okay. And then how is it going to compute? What are the entries that it is going to look at? That is also well defined, okay. So, to compute C11, it will first initialize C11 to be 0, and then it looks at C1, set C11 to C11 plus it looks at the entries A I1, I here is 1 and B 11, because J is 1 and I is 1. So, B1, A11 and B11. It looks at these two matrix entries, look at the compute that product and add it to this. Then it is going to look at A12, B21 and then A13, B31 and so forth, and A1n and Bn1. So, it is not only that it is going to first determine C11, what are the entries that it is going to look at as part of this computation, they are also predetermined. Okay. So, if you have the same algorithm and run it on the same input of matrices A and B, the values that you get Cij equals 0, that will be the first value that it will be settled, and the entries that it is going to look at A11, B11, A12, B21, this is the order in which it is going to look at. And then for the computation of C12, okay, it is now going to look at the first row, look at the compute the inner product of first row and the second column of B. So, the entries that it is going to look at as part of this computation is A11, B12, A12, B22 and so forth, A1n, Bn2. So, the entries that it is going to look out, you recall that A11, A12, A1n have already been looked at. The same entries are now again going to be looked at as part of computation of C12. Not only that, the order in which they are going to be looked at, they are also same. So, the entire algorithm is, the algorithm is completely predetermined in the sense that how it is going to evolve, the execution is going to evolve, what are the steps, intermediate steps that it is going to perform next, and what are the entries, values that it computes, everything is well defined. Okay. This is what we call generally a deterministic algorithm. Now, in this, what distinguishes this as against randomized algorithm is, you are allowed to employ, okay, randomization. So, what is randomization? Randomization is a way of saying that we do not know what it is going to be. Okay. So, in this context, what one can think of this, maybe this example may not illustrate this very well. Okay. Let me look at okay. Okay, we will illustrate this. We are going to see an example of a randomized algorithm. There you will see this clearly, how randomization is employed. Okay. So, one such example is this randomized quicksort. This is what I will cover in this lecture. So, what you are going to do is, the next entries that you are going to look at and the next values, how the algorithm evolves, what are the steps that it is going to do, all these could vary for the execution of the same algorithm over the same input. Okay. For the execution of the same algorithm over the same input. So, here in a deterministic algorithm, it remains the same. You fix the algorithm and you fix the input, you run the algorithm again and again any number of times, everything remains the same. Whereas, in a randomized algorithm, these are going to vary, because you are allowed to employ randomness. Okay. And if you want to see a more concrete example, something which you can easily connect with, just think of going from one city to another city, or maybe one locality of Chennai to another locality. Okay. And as you know, there are several different ways in which one can go from one locality to another locality. So, a randomized algorithm is like someone who always goes along a fixed route. Now, a deterministic algorithm is like someone who always goes along a fixed route, he never changes the route. Whereas, a randomized algorithm is like someone who decides at every junction which way he goes to proceed further. It may make no sense to employ this algorithm in a day-to-day life, but think of, for sake of argument, that someone goes to the junction at the end of this Madhya Kailash and then he says to go to Adayar junction, there it is forced, you have to take a left turn and then go to IIT gate and then take a U-turn and come. But there are other ways in which one can go. So, see, for example, if you want to go to OMR, say Mahabalipuram, one way is to go to Tidal Park and then travel along OMR to Mahabalipuram. That road takes you directly to Mahabalipuram. Or one can choose to go take a left turn and go to Thiruvanmiyur junction. From there, catch on to ECR and you go along ECR, that will also take you to Mahabalipuram. So, these are different ways. So, a randomized algorithm is something like this, which employs randomness at every point to decide what is the next course of action that it is going to take. And what is how does it employ randomness? It employs randomness by means of accessing a sequence of random bits. Okay. So, this is something which we assume. So, the randomized algorithm, in addition to the regular input that you have, also assumes the availability of a sequence of independent random bits. Okay. And so, what is a random bit? Okay. A random bit is a bit, okay, which takes values 0 or 1, such that probability that it takes the value 0 is half, and which is also probability that it takes the value 1. So, we call such a bit as an unbiased random bit. Okay. So, it has access to an unbiased random bit, okay, not just one random bit, it has access to a sequence of unbiased random bits. Okay. How long the sequence could be will depend on the way the algorithm is designed, and the way, and also depend on the input instance that you are feeding to the algorithm. But it assumes the availability of such sequence of random bits B1, B2 and so forth. And at any point the algorithm, depending on the way it has been designed, may decide to consult these random bits, and then based on the value of the random bit it may choose one of the several possible courses of actions, and in this way it proceeds further. And since it is allowed to consult random bits, okay, what it means is essentially that the execution of the algorithm and the output that it produces and the values that it computes at intermediate stages, everything could change. Okay, it could all be varying, and even the running time could also vary for the same input. You recall that for a deterministic algorithm, once you fix the algorithm, you feed the input, then one can calculate very precisely the number of elementary operations that it will perform. Okay, and that is determined how many times that you feed the input to the algorithm. On the other hand, for a randomized algorithm, because of the randomness that it employs, it could vary very widely and differently. Okay, and so as a result, the running time could also be varying very much. Sometimes it could take very less time, sometimes it could take many number of steps. So, why do you employ randomness? For the simple reason that it leads to very efficient algorithms at times. Okay, and it also suppose, so why do you require randomness? First of all, see, often you want the output of the algorithm to be very correct. Sometimes you can live with some uncertainty. You don't want the output to be correct with certainly. You are willing to live with the possibility that the output is wrong, but with a very low failure failure probability of being failure, probability of giving an incorrect answer. The reason is sometimes the efficiency is of bigger concern than the uncertainty in the correctness of the answer. Okay, you may be willing to live with an incorrect answer which happens only with very low failure probability, then you want to spend time. Okay, so this happens everywhere in nature. Okay, so efficiency becomes, after all, computers are meant to improve the efficiency. So if efficiency is a very important criterion, and if you are willing to live with some uncertainty in the answer, even though that uncertainty will be very low, you are willing to go for such an algorithm, and randomized algorithm provide are an example of such algorithms. Okay, the output they give may be wrong, but the chances that the output is wrong is very low. So you are willing, but it increases the speed in the running time. Okay, so this is a thing that you want to have, ensure for yourselves. Another thing where it could play a role is that if you look at the typical, if you look at how the running time of an algorithm is defined, how do you define in the what is the definition of a running time of an algorithm over an input of size n? Okay, let's assume that we have matrices of size. Let's assume that m equals n, n equals p. Okay, then you want to multiply two matrices of dimensions n by n and n by m. And what will be the running time of this algorithm? This is a straightforward algorithm. It just implements the definition of the matrix product. What is the running time of this algorithm? Huh? It should be easy to huh? Mn? Ah, okay. I assumed m equals n equals p, so it is n cube. And you should be aware, you all I think must have done a first course in algorithms, particularly the divide and conquer paradigms must have been exposed to you. And one good example of divide and conquer paradigm is the improvement in the running time that you get for matrix multiplication by dividing the matrix into four submatrices, n by 2, n by 2 each, and then there is some small trick which you employ to improve the running time. That gets you an algorithm of I think something like n power log 7 to the base 2. Yeah? Okay. So okay, now if you look at this algorithm, the straightforward algorithm, it takes n cube time. Now this is not a good example. Let's look at another example. Suppose you have this quicksort algorithm. Okay. So you know what is quicksort. Okay, you want to sort an array q, let me call this as q sort of an array who you want to sort the entries in this array between positions p and q. Okay. Then how does quicksort proceed? So it first you recall the, how does it proceed? Partition the array into two subarrays. How does it do? One of them is greater than the that is called not pivotal value. It first chooses a pivotal element. Typically it chooses P, okay. It chooses, let me call this A as A of P. It looks at the first entry in the array, A of P, and then it determines in the sorted array where should A of P be sitting, okay, the correct order position. So there are q minus p plus 1 positions in this, there are q minus p plus 1 entries there. Assume for sake of simplicity that they are all distinct. What is the correct sorted position that it will occupy? You first determine this. How do you determine this? How do you determine the correct position? By comparing this pivotal position with every other entry in the array. Okay? And then when you compare it with every other entry, you can keep a counter and determine how many of them are less than this, how many of them are more than this. And then you have to put it in a position which is the number of entries less than this plus 1 position starting from P. So you first determine the correct position of the starting pivotal element, yes. You move it there. When you move it there, as part of this process you also ensure that everything that is less than the pivotal pivot goes to the left of pivotal element and everything above the pivot goes to the right of pivot. This is another thing that you ensure. So as a result of this step, what you get is that what was A of P initially, namely the entry S, come and occupy its correct position. Everything here would be less than S and everything here would be greater than S. Okay. Now, and then what you do is you recursively sort these two subarrays. You have already made sure that everything here is less than this and everything here is more than this. So you can now, to further sort this array, you can now just focus your attention on this and focus your attention on this. So you write two recursive subcalls. So sort this recursively by quicksort and sort this recursively by quicksort. Again employ the same technique for, and then you go. So what you get is a sorted array, sorted in increasing order. Now there is nothing special about this choice of the pivotal element S. You could have chosen the pivotal element instead of S, you could have chosen your S to be either A of P plus 1. The way the algorithm has been designed, it was a deterministic choice. So whoever wrote the computer program, he has chosen to use this choice, namely the pivotal entry will always be A of P. One could choose A of P plus 1 also, A of P plus 2 and so forth. All these things will not matter much in the worst case running time of the algorithm. Okay. Now, what is the worst case running time of this algorithm? Yeah, order of n square. So you know what is worst case running time? The definition of worst case running time. So there are, if you are trying to sort an array on n entries, okay, n distinct real values, say, then there are n factorial permutations that are possible in which these n reals can be placed in, and each of these n factorial permutations could be your input. What matters is the relative ordering of the entries, not the actual entries. Okay. So with respect to relative orderings, what matters is that which of these permutations, the correct sorted order corresponds to the permutation 1, 2, 3, 4 until n, and which of these, so your the input array is nothing but one of these permutations effectively. Since it is one of these permutations, you apply this quicksort algorithm to each of these input and determine its running time. Okay. Here the focus is only on the number of comparisons that you use. It is not the running, by running time I do not mean other parts of the running time, the things that are required for moving entries from one place to another and so forth. We only focus on the number of comparisons. How many times you compare one entry with another entry. Okay. That is the basic elementary thing that we focus on. If you focus only on the number of comparisons, then what you have here is, for each of them, the running time varies between, say, n to what is the maximum that one can think of. What is the maximum number of comparisons that can be performed? In the worst case, how many comparisons you will perform? Huh? n into n plus 1 by 2. So just think about it carefully. The pivotal element will be compared with how many of them? n minus 1. Okay. In the worst case, so the n minus 1 plus n minus 2 and so forth, n choose 2. Okay. n into n minus 1 by 2. The sum of all these is n into n minus 1 by 2. This is the maximum number of comparisons that you will perform. Can you think of an example where these many comparisons will actually be required? Huh?
It's already sorted but in reverse order.
Already sorted but reverse order. Okay. So let us take n minus 1, okay, 3, 2, 1. Why do you say that it will, okay, so n will be compared with each of these and it will be determined that it has to go into the last position. When it goes into the last position, what about the position of these? So what will be the, so what do you get? You get two subarrays, that is what we saw. The right subarray would be empty, okay, there is no entry there. Left subarray would have all of the n minus 1 entries. Now how will the subarray of this would look like? Huh? So what is a, so you are comparing, n will be compared with each of these, and it will be determined that the correct position in the sorted order of the entry n is n itself. So we know that it has to be moved to the nth position. When you move it to the nth position, you know that you have to move all the other entries to the left or right subarray in such a way that it satisfies this property. So when you do that, what will be the left subarray look like in this? How will it look like? So if you employ this simple idea of moving, that is whenever you compare n with this, and if so, how will you move the arrays? How will you move the entries of the array? Will you disturb the relative ordering or will you not disturb the relative ordering? So can you huh? Huh? Relative ordering will not be disturbed. Okay. So are you sure that relative ordering will not be disturbed? Can you also not think of a algorithm where the movement can disturb the relative ordering? Yeah? Okay, when you swap it to the last element, what will happen? So this will get 1, n minus 1, 2, n. This is what you get. So what are you doing here? You are taking n. First you determine the position is n. So what you do is you swap this with this, so you get 1 here and this. Okay. This is one way, swapping. Is there other ways of moving this? Because the way I have described the algorithm, it is vague. In the this description is vague. I didn't specify details of how we are going to move these entries. I only said that determine the correct position of the pivotal element, move it to its correct position, and ensure that everything that is less goes to the left part and everything that is bigger goes to the right part. I didn't say anything else. Okay. Is there other ways in which you can move this to this, so that this will be nothing but what comes to the left subarray would be nothing but this array, n minus 1, 3, 2 and so forth, n minus 1, n minus 2, n minus 3 until 3, 2, 1. One can think of, okay. Is it not possible to think of this? So if you studied this quick sort, then there is a way in which what you will get is this will be the array of all elements which are less than s, but the relative ordering in the original array is not changed. Similarly, the relative ordering in the original array here is also not changed. Okay. So let us assume that we employ that way of moving the entries. If you employ that way of moving the entries, what is the size of the subarray here? It is n minus 1, but it is reverse sorted. Okay. So if this requires n minus 1 comparison, this will require another n minus 2 comparison and so forth. So in the worst case, you will require n into n minus 1 by 2 comparisons. So it suffices to know that it can become as large as theta of n squared comparisons. Okay. So you may require theta of n squared comparisons to sort the array. Okay. There are inputs where it will require theta of n squared. This is an example of what we call a deterministic algorithm. Everything is determined. So the choice of this is deterministic, and comparison, based on the comparison you determine, and everything is deterministic. Now suppose instead of doing it this way, I employ randomness here as follows. What I do is I don't choose this in this way. Okay. I choose, okay, a random position from PQ uniformly at random. Okay. I uniformly at random choose a position not the entry, choose a position between P and Q, and let S denote the entry in this random position. Okay. So, S is a randomly chosen pivotal element. Now, in this case what you have is there are Q minus P plus 1 entries. I am choosing one of them, any of them is possible to appear as the pivotal position. I am choosing one of them uniformly at random. Okay. And then what I do is determine the correct position of this pivotal element. Okay. Determine correct position of S in the sorted order. Okay. And then what are you doing? You move. The rest of the algorithm is very similar to what you have this deterministic quicksort. Okay. Move entries which are less than S to the left of S. No, I have to have written some, I have to have determine the correct position and also move to its correct position. Also move S to its correct position. Okay. Or okay, let me come to that. Move S to its correct position and then move entries which are less than S to the left of S. Move entries which are more than S to the right of S. Okay, you also do this. So, the remaining part of the algorithm is very similar to this. And then what you do is recursively sort, okay, apply randomized quick sort. I call this as rand quick sort apply to array A between positions P and Q. Now, the pivotal element S, let me, I have to have another symbol, determine the correct position, let the correct position be okay, some J, okay, correct position J of S in the sorted order, okay. Then apply randomized quick sort, maybe, yeah, quick sort from P to J minus 1 and randomized quick sort to the right subarray, that is J plus 1 to Q. Okay. So, the array is a global array which is accessible to all the recursive subcalls. Okay. So, what do we do? You choose a random entry and keep that entry as your pivotal element. So, by a pivotal element we mean the following, that it is going to be placed first in its correct position in the sorted order, and the correct position is going to be determined by comparing that entry S with every other entries, and you determine how many are less than, how many are more than, that will tell you where to place these. So, you first determine the correct position J and move S to its correct position. Okay. Whatever that remains there, that will be swapped with that will be moved to something some other place, or it will be swapped with the original position of S, and then move entries which are less than S to the left of S and move entries which are right more than S to the right of S. Now apply randomized quicksort to this subarray, randomized quicksort to this subarray, you are done. Okay. Now there is a marginal case here. If P equals Q, then exit, then there is nothing to do. Okay. Or if P equals Q, exit, or if Q is just P plus 1. These are the what you call the base cases. I will not elaborate on. You can choose your base case as you like. Okay. And then you do this. Finally, what you have at the end of all these recursive calls, when you come out of this recursive call is a sorted array. The entries of A between positions P and Q would have been correctly sorted in increasing order. Okay. So now let us look at this algorithm. This is what we call an example of a randomized algorithm. This is an example of a randomized algorithm. So where does randomization play a role? It plays a role in this choice. Okay. Now I have not initially I have told that a randomized algorithm is basically a deterministic algorithm which is equipped with an access to a sequence of independent random bits. So I said only random bits, but here I am talking about how am I going to use these random bits to choose this. That we will come to this later. Okay. We will come to these issues little later. So for the moment we will assume that the algorithm can choose any random number, okay, from any finite set. That is what we will assume initially. Then it is going to choose a random number between the numbers P and Q, both inclusive, and then choose this rth entry in this array A as the pivotal element and goes on to this. And rest of the part of the algorithm is very deterministic like the original algorithm, except that when it applies recursive call here, there will again be randomness applied here. Okay. And what about the random choices here and here? The random choices here and here, for now we will assume that they are all independent. By the way, I assume some familiarity with probability theory. You all know, I have studied some course on probability theory, elementary probability theory. You know what is independence. When do you say two events are independent? What is the expectation of a random variable? What is variance and so forth. Okay. If you do not know, then we will have to expose those concepts. Okay. Then finally this is the algorithm. Okay. Now let us look at the running time of this algorithm. Now is it clear that this algorithm correctly solved any given array? Is there any proof needed? One can prove that these subproblems are. So the proof goes from the base case by induction. So once this is proved, all those subarrays in which you have only two entries, okay, they will be taken care of and so forth. So by an inductive argument, one can get a very formal proof that the algorithm correctly sorts the array between P and Q. Okay. So there is no doubt about the correctness of the algorithm. What about the running time? Okay. If you go to running time, then the running time of the algorithm need not be the same. Okay. Now let us illustrate this with an example. Here you gave this algorithm reverse sorted array. Okay. Now suppose you take this example 1 2 3 n. Okay. In the case of 1 2 3 n, okay, the input is already sorted, and think of this sorting algorithm. The first entry would be A of P. Okay. 1 will be the pivotal entry and it is already in its correct position, but just to determine that fact, it will compare 1 with everything else and it determines that there are n minus 1 entries which are bigger than n. So, 1 should be in the first position. Just to determine this fact, it will do n minus 1 comparisons and finally determine its correct position. And what you have is, there is no swap involved here, and what you have is the entries 2, 3, n. You get this as your right subarray, and it was basically the original array, so restricted to positions this and this. Again, you will choose this as the pivotal position and determine after doing n minus 2 comparisons that this is the correct position and so forth. So, finally, what you get is that you spend n minus 1 comparisons, n minus 2 comparisons and so forth for a total of n choose 2 comparisons. Now, in this subarray, suppose you employ this randomized quicksort algorithm, what you get is that you will choose uniformly at random one of these positions. Okay. Now, if you just think of the algorithm, you will get an intuition that the algorithm takes more time, because once you divide it into 2 subarrays, okay, the number of comparisons are reduced. Anything in the left subarray will never be compared with anything in the right subarray. Okay. Because once you determine the correct position of the pivotal element and move everything to the left and right appropriately, then these entries will never be compared with each other. That is not happening here. One is compared with everything else just to determine its correct position, and 2 is compared with everything else just to determine its correct position and so forth. All these could be avoided if you can ensure that the number of, if these two are of bigger size. The problem here is that you get 2 subarrays, one is an empty subarray, another is all the remaining entries, and this keeps on happening again and again. This is what contributes to these n choose 2 number of comparisons totally. You can avoid this if you can ensure that this subarray and this subarray are not too small. So, what do you mean by not being too small? One can define it precisely. Suppose you can ensure that this will be at least say n by 4. If this is at least n by 4, then this has to be at most 3n by 4. Okay, and so you can simply require that following, namely that the 2 subarrays cannot be too small in size. If you can ensure that, then what happens? So, if you can ensure at any point that your choice of the pivotal element is such that there are at least n by 4 entries here and at least n by 4 entries here. As a consequence of that, you get that there are at most 3n by 4 entries here and at most 3n by 4 entries. As a result, if the total number is n, then if this has say x and this has y, you get x plus y equals n minus 1. Okay. And what you are doing is you are forbidding the comparison between any entries, any of the x entries in the left subarray with any of the y entries in the right subarray. How many of there are xy entries? You are avoiding the work of having to compare these xy pairs. Okay, and this will be maximized when these two are very close to each other. Say x and y are n minus 1 by 2. In that case, you are avoiding the comparison, and this in fact contributes, helps. But often it is not possible to ensure that you will always be able to ensure n minus 1 by 2 here, n minus 1 by 2 here. Okay, because if you want n minus 1 by 2 here and n minus 1 by 2 here, then you will have to have here exactly the middle entry. Assume that n is odd, so that n minus 1 is even, so that n minus 1 by 2 is makes sense, it is an integer. Then S should be exactly the middle entry. And if you are having n entries and if the n is odd, there is a unique middle entry, and if you have to choose the unique middle entry, that is very unlikely. The probability that among n entries you choose exactly the middle entry is 1 over n. Okay, so the probability of this event is very unlikely. On the other hand, If you can ensure that at least n by 4 are here and at least n by 4 are here, as a consequence of which you have at most 3 n by 4 and at most 3 n by 4, that is more likely. Okay. So, what does it require you? It requires you to choose your pivot element. This is your sorted array. You should avoid choosing anything outside this range. You have to choose an entry which lies only within the first n by 4 and the first 3 n by 4. Anything you avoid these. Now, how many entries are there between n by 4 and 3 n by 4? There are n by 2. Probability of choosing an entry from this range, which are there are n by 2, is exactly half. Okay. So, with higher probability you can ensure this. You cannot ensure this n minus 1 by 2 exactly. Okay. But this suffices for us. As a result of this, what happens is that the running time of the randomized quicksort gets reduced. Okay. But then what is running time? When you talk about a randomized algorithm, that itself is not well defined. Okay. As you can see with this example, 1, 2, 3 n. Okay. If at every point you always choose the least element, as in the deterministic case 1, 2, 3 and so forth, then you will end up spending n choose n minus 1 by 2 comparison. There is no way you can avoid that. Okay. On the other hand, if I choose this randomly, okay, and what happens is, suppose I choose something between n by 4 and 3 n by 4, you have forbidden, you have avoided comparing. Okay. If I am able to, or rather let me put it this way, if you choose exactly the middle element, then you have avoided the comparison of n minus 1 by 2 times n minus 1 by 2, which is of the order of n squared or n squared by 4. Okay. N squared by 4 comparisons you have already avoided. So, from n choose 2, now the number of comparisons that you will need to, this algorithm will require, goes down by a factor of, additive factor of n squared by 4, from n squared by 2 minus n squared by 4. You have already ensured that just n squared by 4 comparisons are sufficient. Okay. In just, if you can ensure in the first pivotal choice, if you can ensure that you choose the middle element, even though the probability of this happening is very less, you can, there is a positive probability with which this happens. You have already reduced it. So, as you can see that the running time of the algorithm, if at every time you choose only the least element, it can become n choose 2. On the other hand, if you can ensure just in the first iteration, the first recursive call, if you can choose the middle element, which is n minus 1 by 2, you have already reduced the number of comparisons by an additive factor of n squared by 4. Okay. And if you can ensure in further recursive calls something which is very close to the middle element, you can again reduce the number of comparisons by a larger and larger amount. Okay. So, the running time of the algorithm is no longer the same, it varies. Okay. It depends on how the algorithm chooses. The choice of the pivotal element plays a very crucial role in determining the number of comparisons. By running time I mean only the number of comparisons. Okay. So, because that is what our focus interests now. So, as a result, the number of comparisons can vary anywhere between, okay, n choose 2 to, in the first case you will end up doing at least n minus 1 comparisons. Okay. That is something which you will have to perform at least in the first iteration. So, it varies between n minus 1 and n choose 2. So, it is not uniquely determined by the algorithm and the input, it is determined by the execution of the algorithm. So, in one execution of the algorithm, this algorithm over the same input, it can happen that the algorithm spends only say of the order of n log n time. In another execution of the algorithm, it can spend as much as n choose 2 time, n choose 2 number of comparisons. So, it varies. So, the running time is no longer the uniquely determined value. Since it is not a uniquely determined value, since it depends on the random choice, it becomes what we call a random variable. Okay. Running time is a random variable. So now once the running time becomes a random variable, it makes no sense to talk about the running time of the algorithm as if it is uniquely determined by the input and the algorithm. That is what happens in the case of deterministic algorithm. So now what you have to talk about, what we call an expectation of the running time. So okay, it can vary anywhere between n minus 1 and n choose 2. I am not interested in that, I am interested in the expectation. As you know, expectation is something like what we call average. Okay. It's a generalization of what we call average. In the normal average, we sum the numbers and then divide it by the number of numbers. But if you assign weights to the different numbers, then count it according to that, what we call that as the expectation. Now, so the interest now, what we are interested is now the expectation of the running time, expected number of comparisons. That is one parameter. Okay. Expected number of comparisons. So this is one type of algorithm that one can think of. An algorithm where, so there is one scenario. This also is a good example to illustrate two different types of randomized algorithms. One is that the expected number of comparisons is what we are interested. Here, but when we say this, what we implicitly assume there is that the algorithm is required to always succeed and produce correctly a sorted array. Okay, that is what we are. Now, another thing that would be interested is not just the expected number of comparisons. We would also like to know, okay, expectation may be whatever it is. We will eventually prove that the expected number of comparisons is of the order of theta of log n. That we will prove later. So let me spend some time here illustrating this. So n log n we know is the running time of any best deterministic algorithm. Can you think of one example of deterministic algorithm where you can do in n log n time? Yeah? Huh? Huh? Merge sort. Okay. Merge sort requires only n log n time. And what about heap sort? Heap sort. Okay. So when you say they require only n log n time, what does it mean? What does it mean to say that the running time complexity of merge sort is n log n? What do you mean by that statement? Huh? Yeah? It is a lower bound. So when you say time complexity of merge sort is n log n, you mean that it is a lower bound on the running time? No, speak boldly, you are not being evaluated. Huh? So what do you mean by that phrase, time complexity? Huh? No, just speak little loudly, I am not able to, there is constant noise from here. Maximum number of comparisons that may be required. So as I explained to you some time back, if we focus only on the relative order of the comparisons, because that is what is going to determine the running time of the algorithm, not the actual entries, whether you compare 1 through n in the sorted array 1 through n, or say n plus 1 through 2n again in the sorted order, they both are going to take the same number of comparisons. So it is a relative order among the entries that is going to determine, and there are n factorial permutations. If the input consists of distinct entries, there are n factorial different possibilities. Each possibility requires certain number of comparisons by the deterministic quicksort algorithm, and you calculate all these n factorial numbers, take the maximum of these n factorial numbers. The maximum time is defined to be the running time complexity of this deterministic quicksort algorithm on an n size input. By size here we mean the number of distinct entries in the array. That is what for the sake of simplicity we focus only on the number of inputs. Okay. We assume that entries can be compared in constant time, we do not count the time required for that, we just assume that it takes only 1 unit of time. Okay. So, that is what we mean by time complexity. When you say merge sort time complexity is theta of n, what we mean is there is some constant, okay, say some 100 or 1000 or 10,000, says that every n distinct numbers can be sorted by this merge sort algorithm within using a number of comparisons which is not more than say 10,000 times n log n comparisons. Okay, that is what we mean, which is same for heap sort. The constant associated with heap sort may vary, it may not be 10,000 but something else, but and here the constant associated with is 2 nhn, precise number of comparison is 2 nhn. We will define what is nhn. Hn is the nth harmonic number. Harmonic number is the sum of the reciprocals of the first n numbers. So, Hn is 1 plus 1 by 2 plus 1 by 3 etc. until 1 by n, and one can show that these numbers asymptotic order of these is log n. So, okay, 2 n Hn. So, it becomes theta of n log n. Okay. So, we know that the algorithm quicksort, as since you define time complexity with respect to theta of n squared, what happens is you always talk about time complexity is always talked about in the scenario of worst case complexity, okay, maximum running time on an input instance. Since you do not know what will be the input, since you cannot preclude any particular input, you will have to be prepared to be face any such challenge. It is like this, if you want to cross from one bank of a river to another bank of river, would you ask for what is the average depth or would you ask for the maximum depth? You would like to know the maximum depth, average depth does not save you, it is a maximum depth which you would like to know, okay, to cross from one bank of the river to another bank, because if the depth can become very large at some point, then you are, and if you do not know swimming, then you are in a very problematic situation. So, there it is very similar to that, the principle is very similar to that. Since you do not know that any particular input can be avoided, you try to be prepared for any eventuality. In the worst case, the algorithm can take as much as n square time, that is what you are focusing on, that is the idea with which worst case time complexity is defined, worst case asymptotic complexity. But then what happens is that even for deterministic algorithm, even though the worst case running time can become as much as n squared, if you look at the average running time, by average what I mean is average over all possible n factorial permutations. You sum up the running time of all the input algorithm over all possible inputs and divide it by n factorial. Okay. Let us assume that we take uniform distribution over all permutations, then the average running time turns out to be n log n. Okay. So, that is distinct from what we talk about average running time here, the expected running time here. Here we are not talking about the expectation with respect to the input, we are talking about expectation with respect to the randomness employed by the algorithm. This is distinct from the expectation over the input. So, there what I am talking about is you take a deterministic algorithm, introduce a distribution over the inputs, okay, the distribution is uniform choice over all possible n factorial permutation, and then with respect to that distribution look at the average running time of the algorithm, it is n log n. Okay. It means, what does it mean? It means that most of the permutations can be sorted in theta of n log n time. Okay. That follows from a simple inequality in probability theory called Markov inequality. Okay. By most, to be precise, I will not say most, let me say very high fraction which you can make as close to 1 as you want, all such fraction of inputs can be solved using not more than theta of n log n comparisons. Okay. So, what contributes to the n squared is only a very small fraction of the inputs, and these very small number of very small fraction of the inputs make the algorithm take large amount of time, something of the order of n squared or maybe slightly less than that. Okay. This is what we call the worst case complexity with respect to a deterministic algorithm. Okay. Now, what we see here is the expected running time. The expected running time is with respect to randomness employed by the algorithm. Okay. Now, if you look at the randomness employed by the algorithm, because of this randomness one can only talk about expected running time. This expected running time, what we are saying is that, let me define it, introduce this notation very precisely, expectation of TA of I. Okay. So, what does this notation mean? T is the symbol for time, A is a symbol for the algorithm. In this case, we can take this to be randomized quicksort, and n is the size of the input. Okay. Then let me put it this way, is theta of n log n for all input such that size of the input is n. So, what we mean here is that the expected running time of this algorithm, since we know that once you have a randomized algorithm A, the running time of the algorithm over the input could only be a random variable, it can take any possible value over different executions. It makes sense to talk about expected running time. When we focus on the expected running time, one can show that the expected running time is theta of n log n for every input. There are n factorial permutations that can become input. For every such n factorial permutations of size n on n numbers, okay, the expected running time is only theta of n log n. Okay. This is what we will show later. Okay. This expectation is different from what we have as expected running time of a deterministic algorithm over a random input. The input is random there. Okay. Now, the second question that you would like to address is, in such randomized algorithms, is, okay, I am not particularly interested about expectation, I have some constraints on the running time. Even if I do not have to use only n log n comparisons, I certainly cannot use more than say n times square root of n comparisons. Okay, n times square root of n comparisons. If I have to use more than n times square root of n comparisons, since this randomized quicksort is going to be used repeatedly again and again in my algorithm, the overall running time of the algorithm will become very large. I do not want that possibility to happen. So, what you would like to know is, what is the probability that the running time of the algorithm can shoot up beyond n root n. Okay. So, you are also interested in determining answers to these questions. So, what you are interested is probability that TA of n, okay, can become more than say c times n times square root of n. What is this probability? You want to know this. When I say probability, you are not really interested in determining this probability exactly. You are only interested in determining an upper bound on this probability. What you would like to ensure is that this probability is very small. Okay. The probability that it becomes more than n times square root of n is very small. That is what you want to ensure. Okay. And typically you would like to ensure that it does not become say more than 1 over n, some such a thing, or more than say 1/4 or 1/10, some such guarantee you want a guarantee. So, is it possible to give mathematically derived rigorously proved upper bounds on these? These are another type of questions that we will be interested in when you talk about randomized algorithm. Okay. And in this case, because of this, it happens that the probability of this is very, very small, that we will see later. Okay. So, in fact, the name quicksort was given to quicksort by its inventor C.A.R. Hoare precisely because of the fact that its average running time, I am talking in this deterministic scenario, its average running time is n log n. Okay. He proved that its average running time is n log n. So, he was very thrilled by this and he gave the name quicksort to this. Now, let us look at this algorithm, randomized quicksort. Okay. So, how do you going to determine the running time? You are going to determine the running time by means of the following analysis. Now, so correctness we are guaranteed. What we are now interested in proving the expectation. We want to prove that the expected number of comparisons is theta of n log n. Okay. Towards this purpose, we introduce what we call a variable xij. Okay. Xij is the number of times that ith smallest and ith and jth smallest elements are compared. Okay. So, what is a number of comparisons? It is basically the number of times that different pairs of elements are compared. We know that in the final sorted array everything is going to occupy some place. So, it is the, if it is going to occupy the ith position, it becomes the ith smallest element. So, you talk in terms of pairs of entries where I is less than j. You take two entries which are the ith smallest and j smallest. How many times are they going to be compared by the algorithm? Okay. Now, if you look at this, it turns out that this can never be anything other than 0 or 1. Okay. Let us see why it is. First of all, if you look at this algorithm, what are you doing? You are first choosing a pivotal element and then compare this pivotal element with every other element to determine its correct position. Okay. Once that comparison is made, the pivotal element is moved to its correct position. Afterwards, you are only going to focus only on the left subarray and right subarray. The pivotal element does not come into picture at all further in the execution of the algorithm, including all these recursive calls and the recursive calls that you will generate as part of these and so forth. You are never going to use this. Look at this entry xi and compare it with anything else. So, what does it say? It says that these are the following observations. Comparisons are always made only at this point, okay, or at this point, or maybe both. One can think of these in different ways. I have been deliberately vague in these. One can combine these steps and so forth. I have not spent time on these, but it does not matter. So, what matters is, in one way is to first determine the position and then move the entries. Another way is to, while determining the position, you make sure that the entries which are less are moved to the left and so forth. I have not focused on that. Whatever be, the comparisons are only made in these three steps, and in each of these steps the comparison is always made with pivotal element and something else, and this is with respect to this part. And when you do the recursive call, and look at the comparisons, the same thing happens again here. So from these what you get? You get the following observations, that comparisons are always made only between two elements, one of which is a pivotal element. It is a pivotal element for that sub recursive call that you are talking about, okay. And hence what happens is it clear? Is it clear to you? Huh? You didn't understand, okay. So we are interested in determining the number of comparisons. So you find out how many times you are going to compare, okay. So the comparison is made in these three steps. In each of these steps the comparison is made only with the pivotal element and something else, am I correct? Determine the correct position of S, which is the pivotal element in the sorted order. To determine this position you will do a comparison with everything else, and then when you move entry which are less than S, at that point you will do comparison, and to determine whether something is less than or more than. So you are doing comparison only in these three steps. In each of these three steps the comparison is always with the pivotal element of this step, this recursive call, with something else. So every comparison is always made with respect to one pivotal choice, okay, one pivotal choice. I didn't say which pivotal choice, it could be in this or anything in the recursive calls, with one pivotal choice and some other entry in the subarray of that recursive call. So you never make comparisons between two entries. See, you make comparison in some recursive call. In that recursive call you never make a comparison between two entries, one of which is not a pivotal element, because it is only made at this point. And once you have made that comparison, what do? After all this, the pivotal element goes and occupies in its correct position. Once it occupies its correct position, it is never going to be disturbed again, it is not even going to be accessed, okay. So this shows that, what does this show? It shows that any pair of elements, so what do you have here? These are the observations. If there is a comparison going to be made between I and j, then we know that either the ith smallest or the jth smallest, one of these has to be a pivotal choice, okay. And once you have determined, once one of these is a pivotal choice, okay, it is going to, that pivotal element is going to determine its correct position. Once an element has found out its correct position in the sorted array, it is never going to be compared with anything else. That follows from the description of the algorithm, because then you are only going to focus on the left subarray and right subarray and so forth, okay. Which means between a pair of entries I and j, you are going to make a comparison at most once, it will never be more than one, okay. It could be 0, it could be 0. For example, if you have this subarray n, okay, and if you choose this as your pivotal element, then you are going to move it into the n by 2th position, and for that you will compare n by 2 with each of these. After that what happens? N by 2 has found its correct position, you are never going to compare any of these numbers 1 through n by 2 minus 1 with any of the numbers n by 2 plus 1 through n. So these n squared by 4 comparisons are not going to take place at all, okay. So it could be 0, or if it is going to be compared at least 1, it can only be exactly once, not more than 1, okay, that is one thing. So the number of times that you are going to compare is this. So this is an example of what we call a binary random variable or a indicator random variable, a random variable which takes only one of these two values, 0 or 1, okay. And hence what is expected running time? The running time, number of comparisons is summation over I less than j xij. This is what we get. Okay. And hence expectation of x, which is what we are interested in determining, is expectation of I less than j xij, and there is a very powerful equality in probability theory which you all must have studied. It is the linearity of expectation. By applying that linearity principle, what you get is that expectation of a finite sum of random variables is sum over the individual expectations E of xij. Okay. So, the job now reduces to determining exactly the expectation of xij. Okay. So, let us look at expectation of xij. What is the expectation of a binary random variable? It is exactly the probability that it takes a value 1. Okay. So, xij equals 1. So, this expectation is nothing but summation over all I less than j, the expectation of all these probabilities. Now, what is this? This is where we have to, another important observation we have to make use of. See, this is a very crucial observation which helped us to deduce that it is an indicator random variable, and hence its expectation is just this probability. And another important observation is the following. What is this probability xij equals 1? Okay. Now, let us look at this. You have this, let me denote, use the following as a notation. Xi denotes the ith smallest entry in the sorted array. Okay. So, you look at this sorted subarray between xi plus 1 and xt. Okay. Now, you want to know what is the probability that xi and xj are will be compared. Okay. What is the probability? To see this, first observe that the moment you choose some entry in the subarray as a pivotal element, okay, then after that step you are ensuring that xi and xj will never be compared. Okay. Look at the first time. See, you have this algorithm which is a recursive algorithm. You make some pivotal choice in the first recursive call that spawns two subproblems. Each of the two subproblems are, again you are applying the randomized algorithm. Each of them generate two random pivotal choices, and then they further generate 4 subproblems and so forth. It goes on. Now, you just look at this, the subproblems that you generate in this fashion as something like a binary tree, a complete binary tree. Okay. So, first time you generate 2 and then second time you generate 2 and so forth. Now, what happens is between these two, if you look at the first time that something in one of these, let us look at it this way. Initially, all the entries including xi and xj and everything in between were there in the sorted array. Okay. The initial array A had all of these, and then what are you doing? You are going to separate them into 2 subarrays, left and right, and so forth. The first time that some random choice separates them. You look at the first time that they separate. Once they are separated, then they are never going to be compared again, because that is the way the algorithm has been designed. Okay. So, what matters is the first time that they are going to be separated. What are the possibilities? Just look at this. If you choose, look at the first time that something in these is going to be chosen as the pivotal element. If this pivotal choice is neither xi nor xj but something strictly in between them, then since it is more than xi and less than xj, in that pivotal choice it is you are going to separate xi to the left subarray and xj to the right subarray, and then they are never going to be compared in future. So far they have been part of one array. After this iteration they have been separated into smaller subarrays, they are never going to be compared if you choose this. Or you choose xi as your pivotal choice. If you choose xi as pivotal choice, xi has determined its correct position and everything from xi plus 1 through xj is going to be part of right subarray, and then you are going to now be only focused on them. Okay. Again they are separated, xi is going to be separated from xj. The same argument applies to xj also. Okay. So, the first time that you choose something in between them as your pivotal element, that is going to ensure that the entries xi and xj are never going to be compared again. So, what matters for our probability calculation is the first time they are going to be compared. Okay. So, look at the first time that they are going to be compared. You look at, so what you are going to do is you are going to condition the probability space to that event. What is that event? That you have chosen as your pivotal element something between them, including both xi and xj. Okay. Now, in that, okay, if you choose something strictly between xi and xj, so far they have not been compared, that is why they are part of the same array. If you choose something in between them, then you are going to ensure that they are going to be separated now. Once they are separated, they are never going to be compared again. So, the variable xij will be 0. On the other hand, if you choose xi or xj as your pivotal element, you know whichever that you are going to choose, you are going to compare it with the other one. So, one comparison you are going to make. After that, what happens? The pivotal element has found its place and the other element is going to be part of left or subarray, and it is never going to be compared with the pivotal element again. In any case, what happens is it is either compared xi or xj are chosen, in which case xi and xj are compared, or something strictly in between them are going to be chosen, in which case xi and xj are not going to be compared at all. So far they have not been compared at all. If they are going to be compared, it is only in this recursive call. Afterwards they are not going to be compared at all. So, it is either 0 or 1. Now, when you condition to this probability event, what matters is basically for determining this probability, what matters is given that the pivotal choice is from somewhere between xi and xj, what is the probability that either xi or xj is chosen, because only this is going to make this variable random variable 1. Any other choice is going to make the random variable 0, not 1. So, what is the probability? Initially, so once you condition that your pivotal choice is going to lie between xi and xj, how many entries are there? J minus I plus 1. Among these, only 2 choices, either xi or xj, are going to make the random variable 1. Anything else is going to make it 0. So, this probability is exactly 2 minus j minus 2 over j minus I plus 1. So, you have determined this exactly. Okay. So, you do this. Now, expectation of x is I and then summation over j less than I, that I will write it as, I will take out this factor 2, okay. Then j is exactly I plus 1, in which case it is 1 by 2, 1 by 3 until 1 by n. J can become as large as n. Okay. No, not n. n minus I plus 1, n minus I plus 1, okay. And I can upper bound these, each of these to be, since it starts from 1 over 2 and goes on until n minus I plus 1, the all of these is at most 2 times n into 1 plus 1 over 2 1 over n, which is the nth harmonic number. Okay. And it is well known that this number is of the order of log n. So, the running time of the algorithm is order of n log n. Okay. Am I correct? Is there any doubt in this? And recall that whatever that we did, you have time for lunch, just wait a minute. So, whatever we did, okay, holds true for any input I. Is that correct? What method is only, did we use the structure of the input anywhere in these calculations, whether it is already sorted or whether it is already reverse sorted or any other thing? The input, structure of the input does not play any role in these. Okay. We only use the statistical information, like that if ith and jth smallest elements have to be compared, they can only be compared during that recursive call in which something in between them, including them, are going to be chosen and these things. So, this argument, all these calculations and the expectations hold true, and they do not depend on the input at all. Okay. All these analysis goals for, there are n factorial possible inputs, for each of them these things, calculations and this analysis holds true, which means expectation of the running time of the algorithm, the x here, is theta of n log n for all I. Okay. It is the same for all I. Unlike in the case of deterministic algorithm and their time complexity, you know that the running time of an algorithm can vary depending on the input. Structure of the input plays a role in determining the actual number of comparisons. I am not claiming this is true for any possible randomized algorithm, but in this case, okay. So, the structure of the input, that is why we are able to deduce from this that this is true. So, this is a very powerful observation. What does it say? It says the following: even if the quick sort, okay. So, we talked about one variant of quick sort, namely the first entry is chosen as the pivotal element, but one can argue by similar arguments irrespective of the whether you choose the first entry or the second entry, whichever be the entry, as long as it is a deterministic choice, you can argue and show that it will be, there will be inputs where you may require n squared time. That does not happen. Here the running time, expected running time is always n log n for all possible inputs. Okay. So, what does it show? It shows just by introducing randomness, just in the choice of the pivotal element, we are able to improve the running time from potentially n squared in the worst case scenario to something n log n, even though it is only average running time, average with respect to the choices. But as we will see later, this expectation being theta of n log n can be used to deduce that the running time, probability that the running time becomes more than, okay, say some 100 log n log n. Just an example, do not worry about this constant 100, is only as small as say 1/4, one can ensure this. the constant 1/4 and 100 here and 1/4 there, they don't pay much attention to those constants. I just use them to give you an example. What it means is, one can show that probability that the running time is bigger than some sufficiently large constant times n log n can be upper bounded to be some very small constant, which means with high probability, that is 1 minus that small constant, one can ensure that the running time will always be upper bounded by at most this value. And in the asymptotic scenario, what determines is the running time is this order, that is n log n. That you can ensure with the introduction of randomness. So, this is an example where even the known deterministic algorithms can be made efficient by introducing randomness at some selective points. This is one example. Okay, we will stop here. Wednesday. Feel free to ask any questions. Do you have any questions now?